West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Monday, October 31st. Paul Pelosi, the husband of the Speaker of the House, the woman who was second in line to the presidency, was savagely attacked on Friday. And while surgeons were operating on the fractured skull of the 82-year-old grandfather, deranged right-wing fanatics, Trump media allies, and some of the most powerful people in the world were feverishly trying to stir up conspiracy theories that distracted from the central political headline of this story. That years of Republican propaganda and Trump-fueled fascism led 42-year-old David DePape to break into Nancy Pelosi's San Francisco home, seemingly with the intent to harm her. Today, he'll likely be charged with the attempted murder of the Speaker's husband, who was in the home when DePape allegedly invaded it. San Francisco police say he smashed his way in, a man on a mission, and confronted Paul Pelosi, but looking for Nancy. According to the AP, citing a person familiar with the situation, Pelosi told the intruder that he had to use the restroom. He was engaging with him, trying to hold him off. And in the restroom, that's where Paul Pelosi's phone was charging. And that's when he dialed up 911. When police arrived, DePape attacked Pelosi violently, smashing a hammer into his head and arms, fracturing his skull. Pelosi went into surgery. He is expected to make a full recovery. Police say zip ties were found at the scene, just like the ones found on those who were hunting Nancy Pelosi at the Capitol on January 6th. And that's not the only similarity. Before attacking Mr. Pelosi with a hammer, a source tells NBC News DePape shouted at him, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?" Where have we heard that before? Some on the right would say, don't jump to conclusions and don't connect that to this. A connection? What connection? I don't see a connection. Why would there be a connection? I mean, he was just deranged, right? In an isolated way. And by the way, voters, look over here. Crime is up. Look away from the parallels to January 6th, Trumpist shout. A review of David DePape's online accounts shows he was part of a far-right world of hate, anti-Semitism, and conspiracy theories involving anti-vax hysteria, and voter fraud, and many of his posts published in the past few months. But don't look at that. Ignore the fact that these right-wing screeds line up with the biggest lies propagated by Trump and Trumpists. He was deranged, after all. Just isolated. Never mind the fact that cult leaders and fascists prey first on the weakest, most vulnerable among us. In short, deranged people that they inspire with hate and hardwire for violence against their enemies. But ignore all of that, say Republicans. After all, this political attack was just another example of rampant random crime.
When you let dangerous criminals out on the streets, with bail and not put them in prison, you're just asking for this sort of incident to happen. And I think it created the environment where this happens.
So it's a convergence here of what has been political violence we've witnessed, the rise of just crime on our streets and our subways.
We all need to recognize violence is up across the board. I think the other thing to remember is if this weren't Paul Pelosi, this criminal would probably be out on the street tomorrow.
Other Republicans found this tragedy of an 82-year-old grandfather getting his brains bashed in with a hammer a political punchline, like Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, who saw the attempted murder of Paul Pelosi as a good opening line. Take a listen.
Speaker Pelosi's husband, they had a break-in last night in their house, and he was assaulted. There's no room for violence anywhere, but we're going to send her back to be with him in California.
What? There's no room for violence. When asked about his one-liner, Youngkin's spokesperson said, quote, as the governor clearly said, the assault on Paul Pelosi was wrong and there's no place for violence. He wishes him a full recovery and is keeping the Pelosi family in his prayers. Youngkin's team called the concern that the governor was joking about violence a, quote, mischaracterization. When not making jokes about the attack, other Trumpists were spreading lies about it to make you look away. Take one unfounded anti-LGBTQ conspiracy theory claimed to be tied to the attack. About this theory, Elon Musk, the new owner of Twitter, and the man who wants to see Donald Trump reinstated on the platform, said yesterday, quote, there's a tiny possibility there might be more to this story than meets the eye. That tweet had more than 24,000 retweets and 86,000 likes before he, the new head of Twitter, Chief Twit, deleted it. There is no mischaracterizing what happened. Are we to insist this attack was not the direct result of the dangerous, violent rhetoric we have heard from Donald Trump's Republican Party over the last 6 years? The deranged man who violently assaulted Paul Pelosi got his idea from somewhere. Are we supposed to ignore the fact that threats against the House Speaker have been specific for quite some time? Marjorie Taylor Greene reportedly liked a Facebook comment that stated removing Pelosi from office with a, quote, bullet to the head would be quicker. Greene also claimed under oath that she does not remember that she expressed support for Pelosi's execution back in 2019. That's convenient. Her boss, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, claims he was just joking when he said last year that if Republicans win the House majority and he gets the Speaker's gavel, quote, it will be hard not to hit Pelosi with it. It's pretty funny. It's a good joke. January 6th should have been all the evidence anyone would need. Rioters were there to hang Trump's vice president and do Lord knows what to Nancy Pelosi, all encouraged by Donald Trump. It started before he became president.
This guy started screaming by himself, and they did, I don't know, rough up. Maybe he should have been roughed up because it was absolutely disgusting what he was doing.
So if you see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out of them, would you? Seriously. Okay? Just knock the hell. I promise you, I will pay for the legal fees. I promise. I promise.
We're not allowed to punch back anymore.
I love the old days. You know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks. I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you. We having a good time? USA, USA. All right, yeah, get him out. Try not to hurt him. If you do, I'll defend you in court. Don't worry about it. In the good old days, this doesn't happen because they used to treat them very, very rough. And when they protested once, you know, they would not do it again so easily. Isn't it great to be at a Trump rally, really? Right? Part of the problem and part of the reason it takes so long is nobody wants to hurt each other anymore, right?
You know, it continued into his presidency. Remember Charlottesville? There are good people on both sides. Remember the subtle messages, stand back and stand by? When left unchecked, Trump led an increasingly desensitized nation through shocking moment after shocking moment, all the way through this, the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Yeah, there are many weak, deranged minds in this country, like the man who attacked Paul Pelosi. But Republicans have been hiding behind that word deranged, as if it was some isolated incident, and you should only look at that. Don't look at anything else, even if it's screaming out at you. And yet you can see where DePape's ideas came from in his blog posts, in his words, "Where is Nancy?" in his plans. He brought zip ties with him. Deranged people can fall prey to a cult leader like Donald Trump. And they have.
It is Monday, the 31st of October of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is River City Hash Mondays, because, hey, when you have a weekend like we had, today's the perfect day to make you a repurposed gourmet delight. Oh boy. So, the new owner of Twitter, boy, I don't know. With great power comes great responsibility. I guess no one read about that anymore. I blame the parents. I do blame his parents, considering that he is an heir to an apartheid blood emerald fortune. And everybody, I don't know, the pundits seem to think that Musk is rolling up his sleeves and getting right into the SpaceX engine. He's tuning up the Teslas if they come off the line. He doesn't do any of that stuff. He didn't develop anything. He hasn't developed one iota of anything. He bought Tesla. He bought SpaceX and all the engineers that came with both of those companies. And when he doesn't like an engineer, that's, well, for whatever reason, sometimes it's the color of their skin, he replaces them quickly. He doesn't develop anything. Oh, yeah, he might sit in a confab with people who actually know what they're doing. Here's the thing, that people with a lot of money think they have the secret to the universe. I don't accept that. I just don't. Because look at the behavior of this cretin. And that's what he is. He's a cruel cretin. Is it enough to make me leave Twitter? No, because, it's the public square in a sense. It's the barbershop. It's the general store. It's the Sunday ice cream social at the church. So, I may not be actually a member of that church, but I'm a member of the town and I'm showing up. You invited everybody, didn't you? They did. Okay. Will he modify his behavior when his Tesla stocks really tanks? I think that the Saudi money, and we need to remember this, the second in line in terms of partnership in this endeavor are the Saudis. Oh boy. I think that their idea is just to, let the chaos reign. Look at those infidels. Yeah, look at them. I agree. What are we going to do? Hate speech is not free speech, and people ought to learn that. They ought to know that. What was the old adage? Your rights end where my nose begins. Uh-huh. Yeah, you have a right to throw that punch, but you lose the right when it hits my nose. That's how our representative democracy works, and they have taken the most basic aspect of that and said, no, we're doing what we want to do. Another important number to remember is that only 35% of the electorate in Germany were Nazis when they took over. So, same third, the toxic third, it's everywhere. And if you don't rub it out, you got to really work hard, get some elbow grease in there. It'll just come back and keep building and corroding everything. That's why it's the toxic third. All right. Well, I suppose there's many people who said it couldn't happen here, and there's some people who go, I have no idea what that means. In fact, probably a lot more people don't have any idea what that means. It can't happen here. Well, it is. And has been for actually quite a long time. I would say since they began to dismantle Reconstruction, because how dare those people vote? How dare they? Which brings us to the Supreme Court deciding on affirmative action. Now, there were laws that could actually, in some cases, put you to death if you taught a black person to read. Or maybe it was read and write. If it was reading, just maybe you get beat. Writing, I don't know. They might want to do you win. There were laws preventing the education of black people in this country. And now, the white Christo-fascist maggots on the court are going to decide affirmative action. Okay. But let's be clear. They're not going after the white rich legacy kids. They're not part of the class that they're talking about. And we know exactly what they're talking about. It's not that, it's not only that, all the wrong people are voting, but they're educated enough to go vote. And we can't have that. And when I say we, I'm putting myself in the position of the fascist industrialists, the burgermeisters, the toady politicians, maggots. I wish that George Soros would come to our aid. I really do. I mean, they keep blaming him for everything. Well, how about the guy helping us out some? We could use it. I'm not going to hold it against him that I'm still owed all that Soros money from when we divested, the California university system. I was there at Cal when we protested to divest against South Africa Krugerrands. And all I heard after that is that some Jewish guy who collaborated with the Nazis was behind that effort. Oh, really? Sounds to me like you're an anti-Semite. You can't call me an anti-Semite. Some of my best friends are Jews. We love Israel more than the Jews do. What's up with that? That was Mastriani's wife when she came to his aid when he was asked about the anti-Semitism in his campaign. And his wife said, we love Israel more than the Jews. Really? She didn't really have that kind of southern accent in Pennsylvania, but she could have. Okay, well, a lot more to be said about everything that's been said. And with that said, why don't we just get into the curated part of the show, since we put some effort into actually curating a show. So why don't we do that? Well, yes, years of Republican propaganda and Trump-fueled fascism helped inspire that attack on Pelosi's husband, Paul. 82. On the rest of the menu, President Joe Biden cast his midterm ballot on Saturday. Striking Weyerhaeuser workers in the Pacific Northwest are back to work. And the black church tradition of souls to the polls survives Georgia's voting changes. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where UK politicians demand a probe into the Liz Truss phone hack claim. And a venomous 7-foot king cobra that escaped from its home in a Swedish zoo has returned back home by itself. It was cold out there. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link. The chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and she does a lot more than just monitor that chat room, so thank you, Kelly. If you would take a gander, yeah, we talk like that around here. If you would take a gander to the left from the chat room link there across the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you'll find the Patreon link. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and how about possibly sending us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance? If you could afford to send those funds to us once a month, it helps us pay the bills. And we found that when we pay the bills, we can fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance against those dark forces arrayed against the great United States of America, its representative democracy, and representative democracy around the world. It's happening, and we have been somewhat on the forefront in the last 11 years and, well, doing what we can. And part of that is, well, encouraging folks to vote. So you got, well, about 8 days. It's coming up. So if you haven't voted already, please do vote. And if you might take my suggestion, now understand, this is not church, and we're not taking any tax exemption because of religious belief. But if you could vote Democratic up and down the ticket, I think that would be a good thing. And, you know, good not necessarily in the religious sense, but in everything that is moral and right. So there. Okay, if you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. And he does a lot more than just take care of the Twitter feed. We're staying, okay? We're staying for now. Yes, we are. Anyway, if you would also like to follow the show on Twitter, you can do that at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, really wherever podcasts can be found. Let's take a look at this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. It's out of the Associated Press by Sung Min Kim. President Joe Biden, accompanied by one of his granddaughters, a first-time voter, cast his midterm ballot on Saturday. In-person early voting in his home state of Delaware, where Biden regularly returns for weekends, began on Friday. Democrats nationwide have encouraged voters to take advantage of early voting, either by mail-in ballots or at precincts where available to maximize turnout. Biden said he was feeling good about the midterms, which will decide control of the Congress for the next 2 years, maybe forever. In the final days before the November 8 elections, Biden plans to step up his campaign travels with scheduled trips to Pennsylvania, Florida, New Mexico, and Maryland to stump for Democratic congressional and gubernatorial candidates. Biden voted alongside his granddaughter, Natalie, who is 18 years old. He also voted in Delaware last month when he made a quick one-day trip for the state's September 13 primaries. Delaware has no competitive congressional races this cycle. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Dateline, Springfield, Oregon. Union workers at the timber company Weyerhaeuser have ended their strike and could be on the job as early as today or tomorrow in Oregon and Washington. More than 1,000 employees took to the picket line for 46 days because of sticking points over health care costs in union negotiations. The union agreed to end the strike after Weyerhaeuser agreed on some fixed costs instead of percentages. Sudheen Nanawala and Gary Fields of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Black church leaders and activists in Georgia rallied yesterday, Sunday, in a push to get congregants to vote, a long-standing tradition known as Souls to the Polls that is taking on greater meaning this year amid new obstacles to casting a ballot in the midterm elections. At Rainbow Baptist Church, just outside of Atlanta, about 24 cars and a large bus emblazoned with the image of civil rights icon John Lewis formed a caravan in the parking lot. Teresa Hardy, an organizer with voting rights group the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda, led a prayer before the caravan set out for a polling site at a nearby mall. Few people in the group actually cast a ballot there, but organizers said it was important to promote voting, particularly in the wake of new restrictions enacted by the state legislature. State lawmakers nearly did away with Sunday voting under a bill signed into law last year. The Republican-sponsored legislation followed former President Donald Trump's false claims that voter fraud cost him re-election in 2020. The lawmakers backed off the Sunday voting ban. The bill shortened the time to request a mail ballot, rolled back the COVID-19 pandemic-driven expansion of ballot drop boxes, reduced early voting before runoff elections, and prohibited groups from handing out water and food to voters in line. But they're letting armed vigilantes pretty much intimidate you. Just don't offer anybody food and water. Republicans said Georgia's new law was necessary to restore confidence in the state's election system. In other words, white people were upset that all those black people outvoted them. Sunday's caravan ended at a strip mall. where several dozen people held signs encouraging passerbys to vote. Georgia has experienced a significant jump in turnout during early voting, which runs through November 4th. As of Friday morning, more than 1.25 million voters had cast ballots in person, according to the Secretary of State's office, a jump of more than 50% from the midterm elections of 2018. The idea for souls to the polls goes back to the civil rights movement. The Reverend George Lee, a black Mississippi entrepreneur, was assassinated by white supremacists in 1955 after he helped nearly 100 black residents register to vote in the town of Belzoni. It reflects a larger effort in the black community to leverage the church for voting rights, said Dartmouth history professor Matthew Delmont. In addition to motivating potential voters, pastors provide the logistical support to get people to go directly from church service and then go to vote. All right, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, when you can't make good movies about good people. Once again, the DC Cinematic Universe hates their heroes. They hate their be good, don't kill moral stances and wish they were more savage. That's why the real villains in their movies are their heroes, like Superman and Justice League. At Marvel, with great power comes great responsibility. At the DCU, with great individual power comes an oppressive threat to the freedoms of the weak and to the great power of the government. That's why their better movies are about their antiheroes and their best are about their villains. And so Batman gets more broken and dysfunctional, with the Riddler being his last movie's real star, and Suicide Squad, and structurally racist and anti-Semitic, let's turn a mass murderer into a messiah figure, Joker. So, Black Adam also suffers from this hero is stupid/dangerous bias, as well as the same problem as Harley Quinn and Birds of Prey. If you want a Justice Society movie, do that. If you want a Black Adam movie, the same. But here they feel like different tones forced together, and I get they're supposed to present that moral stance conflict between hero and kill-friendly liberating champion, but since the DCU creators can't write the hero's viewpoint as anything but stupid, they treat the conflict superficially at best. Add on to that, the kid who's the back-talking, skateboarding, fanboy, Scrappy-Doo eventual hostage heart of the film, his fat, funny uncle, and his hot mom who's a university professor and concerned for her people except, oh psych, all I care about is my son, and you're like, oh, it's also that kind of movie. Also, it's the kind written, 2 out of 3, by the dominant social group, so that Black Adam's rage from having been enslaved under a dictatorial, exploitative regime and his guilt from his passive hopelessness leading up to his family's execution make his defining character flaw, rather than being a natural sympathy-inducing reaction to that trauma. Ugh. At least there's the first Wonder Woman, and every Black Adam fight scene with The Rock is beautiful. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your Fast Track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today, we're going to discuss the new alphabet soup of variants and subvariants likely to be around this winter.
And we'll talk about ways that boosters add protection, even if you've already had COVID. We're heading into another pandemic winter. Although no completely new variant of the COVID virus has emerged yet, there are several new Omicron subvariants. And you call them Halloween scariants, Tanya. What do we know about them so far?
That's right. Well, the Omicron variant first appeared last fall, and for the last year, COVID cases have mostly been driven by different versions of Omicron. First, there was B1.1.529, then there was BA1, BA2, and BA3, then BA4 and BA5. Now there are some new kids on the block. There's BA4.6, which descended from BA4 and makes up about 12% of COVID cases in the US. And there's BQ1 and BQ1.1, which together make up more than 11% of cases, according to the CDC's variant tracker. And these proportions are steadily growing. Meanwhile, in Singapore, a subvariant called XBB has been driving a surge in cases, and may be the most immune-evasive variant we've seen yet.
So at least 4 newbies. How worried should we be?
Anthony Fauci, Biden's chief medical advisor, called them troublesome. Like other variants before them, they are fast-growing, and at least in the case of BQ1.1, it appears to be better at evading our immunity from prior infection or vaccination, although the vaccines should still offer some protection. Another concern involves monoclonal antibody treatments, like we talked about last show. One that is given prophylactically to immunocompromised people, known as Evusheld, is not effective against the BA4.6 variant. And another antibody drug called bebtelovimab, which the US has already ordered 60,000 doses of, is not effective against BQ1, the FDA said.
That sounds like bad news for folks whose immune systems can't generate a strong response to vaccines.
That's right. Biden administration officials are in talks to develop alternatives, but it's not clear whether those will arrive in time for a winter surge.
Do experts think that we're headed for another surge? And if we are, what role will these new variants play?
COVID cases are already ticking up again in Europe, which is usually a few weeks ahead of the US. So I'd say chances are pretty good we'll be seeing another surge. But this was happening even before the new variants arrived on the scene, so some people think the variants will just accelerate things.
So how can people protect themselves?
The best thing you can do is get your booster shot. The new bivalent booster protects you against both the original SARS-CoV-2 strain and Omicron's BA4 and BA5 subvariants, and it's likely to provide some protection against the newer variants too. Yet as of a couple of weeks ago, only about 5% of eligible people in the US had gotten their booster shot.
That leaves a lot of unprotected people.
It does. And many young children haven't even gotten vaccinated at all. But there's still time to get one before the holidays. Or turkey might not be the only thing being passed around the dinner table. We were just talking about how few people are getting new booster shots. There are lots of possible reasons. Many people just aren't that worried about COVID anymore, and more have gotten it already and recovered. Some may think they now have natural immunity against new infections. Do they?
Sort of. I mean, yes, natural immunity is a real thing. But research shows that it's not as strong as what scientists now call hybrid immunity, which is an older infection plus a new booster.
Meaning people who got infected in the past and got a vaccine have better protection?
Yep. Some of the best data on this comes from a big study done in Qatar and published this summer in the New England Journal of Medicine. It tracked about 150,000 people. Qatar has a very strong system of national health records. So researchers were able to tell who got infected or reinfected with Omicron and when. And they had records of who got vaccinated with the Pfizer or Moderna shots, or who didn't get vaccinated at all.
Did they find any important differences?
They did. First, unvaccinated people had the highest risk of infection, and that's no real surprise. People with a previous infection reduced their risk of a new infection by about 50%. And people who just had the original 2-shot regimen had a similar risk. The scientists think that's because people had those shots about 8 months earlier, so their immunity waned. The big advantage, however, went to people who had an earlier infection plus 3 shots. That's the original 2 shots plus a booster. That reduced chances of reinfection by about 80%. And that was true for both Pfizer and Moderna vaccines.
That's a really striking benefit. Did it hold up for severe disease, keeping people out of the hospital and reducing death rates?
It did. Hybrid immunity like this held off serious illness again by about 80%.
Even among people without earlier infections, a booster shot helps.
Yes, it reduces many of your symptoms. And as someone who was recently laid up by COVID for 2 weeks, I can tell you that fewer symptoms is a big deal. The booster data comes from a different study, a 5-month look at about 1,100 healthcare workers, which just appeared in the journal JAMA. Those who got a booster on top of their original 2 shots were less likely to have fever or chills if they got infected with Omicron. They were less likely to need medical attention and could take care of themselves at home. They also missed fewer hours of work. This is all compared with people who didn't get vaccinated at all.
Do the boosters do anything about transmission risk? The chances of passing the infection on to other people?
They do seem to help. They knock down the viral load, how much virus you have in your body, by about 1/3 compared with unvaccinated people. Now, lower viral load doesn't automatically equate to less transmission, the scientists noted in their study, but other studies have made that link. And about 20% of the people with Omicron infections in this study had no symptoms, so they didn't know that they had the virus and were probably hanging around with other people.
So that in itself increases the chance of transmission.
It does. So boosters do help in several ways. And as you said, now's the time to go out and get one.
Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us. Our show is edited by Jeff Del Vicio and Tulika Bose.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly. And check out Siam.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean. And there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. Occasional aches and pains are an expected part of life, but for many people, pain is a constant companion. Dr. Chad Helmick is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. He's joining us today to discuss ways to manage chronic pain. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thank you.
Chad, how many people in the U.S. suffer from chronic pain?
In 2016, 50 million adults had chronic pain, which is pain on most or every day in the past 6 months. More interesting, though, is that 20 million people have high-impact chronic pain, which is chronic pain that also limits their work or life activities on most or every day in the past 6 months. This is a problem because chronic pain is associated not only with symptoms, but with anxiety and depression, reduced quality of life, and the risk of opioid problems.
What are the most common causes of chronic pain?
The most common causes generally relate to bones and joints, like low back pain and arthritis, but there are many other causes: headaches, sickle cell disease, fibromyalgia, surgery and injuries, and many, many others.
Is chronic pain more common in any particular group of people?
Yes, it occurs at all ages, but it's more common in older middle-aged adults and in the oldest old, 85 and older. It's also more common in women, poor people, and those who live in rural areas.
How is chronic pain treated?
Well, the first thing to do is to get a diagnosis, which can help guide treatment. But the thinking about chronic pain now is that it becomes a chronic disease by itself, regardless of the cause, and that can cause significant problems. The real goal in management is to have a manageable level of pain, not to get rid of all pain. There's several steps that can be taken, and these are sometimes difficult to do because of barriers to access. But it makes sense to do the simplest and safest things first. And these are non-drug steps. Things like physical activity. Walking is perfectly good to help reduce pain. Also, self-management education can give you some confidence in managing chronic pain when you're on your own. There's also physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological therapy, better sleep, which usually means less alcohol, and seeing a chiropractor or getting biofeedback and massage. If that's not enough, non-opioid drugs like Tylenol or Motrin and Advil or naproxen or Aleve can help. If those don't work, then it's time to consider something stronger. Sometimes that's opioids, but there's not great evidence that opioids are good for long-term pain in most people.
Do you have any advice for people suffering from chronic pain?
Well, it's important to work with a variety of providers who are working together to help you. The goal, again, is manageable pain so you can live a productive life. This can include physical therapy, most people can walk, to treat any underlying depression or anxiety, and to avoid further injuries. Finally, the National Pain Strategy is laying out a strategic roadmap to improve pain management system in this country.
Where can listeners get more information about managing chronic pain?
Listeners can go to the NIH website, nih.gov, and type in National Pain Strategy.
Thanks, Chad. I've been talking today with Dr. Chad Helmick about ways to manage chronic pain. If you're experiencing daily pain, talk with your healthcare provider to ensure you have the correct diagnosis and know how to manage your condition. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. Vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
What is Question 4? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Last July, the Massachusetts legislature overwhelmingly voted for the Work and Family Mobility Act, a law that allows qualified Massachusetts residents to apply for a driver's license regardless of their immigration status. Before driving, the law requires the license applicant to be trained, tested, licensed, and insured. The law will allow immigrants without status to make essential trips to work, to get their kids to school, to medical appointments, and to the grocery store. Similar laws already exist in 17 other states, many of which have experienced measurable improvements in road safety. After all, in case of an accident, it's important that all parties have insurance and proper identification. One reason this law, this public safety measure, is supported by a majority of district attorneys and sheriffs and major city police chiefs. But after the law passed, an opposition group gathered enough signatures to put the issue on the ballot this November. The fourth question on the ballot is, should the law be retained? Please don't be confused by the wording of Question 4. Voting yes will keep the law in place. And remember to turn the ballot to the back. That's where Question 4 is printed. That's where you can vote in favor of both human rights and public safety by voting yes on Question 4. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1941. That was the day that the completed Mount Rushmore Monument was dedicated in the Black Hills of South Dakota. The monument portrays massive sculptures of U.S. Presidents George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt hewn into the side of a mountain. Today, 3 million visitors view the sculpture each year. The project remains controversial because it was completed on land held sacred by the Lakota Sioux. 400 men worked for 14 years to complete the carvings. First, the men dynamited 450,000 tons of rock off the mountain. They then used jackhammers and hand chisels to complete the features of each of the president's faces. The sculptures were massive in scale. The president's faces are each as tall as a 6-story building. George Washington's nose is 21 feet long. Many of the men working on the project were miners who had first come to the Black Hills in search of gold. The men were paid $8 an hour, considered an extremely good wage for the time, but they often had to endure layoffs as the funding for the project waned. Despite the dangerous conditions of completing such a project, not one worker died during its construction. Gultzon Borglum, a Danish-American sculptor, headed the effort. He died several months before its final completion, and his son had to oversee the end of the work. The head carver at Rushmore was an Italian immigrant by the name of Luigi Del Bianco. Del Bianco later died of ulcerated silicosis. His lungs were filled with silica dust from working on the carving. In a 1966 newspaper interview, Del Bianco declared, "I'd do it again," even knowing all of the hardships involved. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 39 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high in the low to mid 60s, and we are under heavy foggy conditions here in Rogue River right now. We'll be having a mix of clouds and sun early, well, I don't know, maybe later, which will then be followed by cloudy skies this afternoon, winds light and variable, and then showers this evening right around candy time, becoming a steady rain overnight. Lows in the upper 30s, winds light and variable. Rainfall will be near half an inch. And then a steady rain in the morning tomorrow. Showers continuing in the afternoon. Highs in the upper 40s. Winds light and variable, and rainfall will be around a quarter of an inch. And then a little bit of drying out on Wednesday, and then better part of a half to 3/4 of an inch Thursday and Friday and through the weekend. Ragweed pollen is rated low right outside the window in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is good at 21 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is in the low range at level 2. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.05 inches. Visibility is at 8 miles, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 61 degrees and mostly cloudy with a heavy wind advisory that could disrupt critical electrical infrastructure. Paris is 68 and partly cloudy, and they have the same wind advisory. Rome is 77 and fair. Kyiv is 46 and clear. Kabul is 53 degrees and fair. Hong Kong is 78 degrees and fair with wind. Tokyo is 56 degrees and clear. Sydney, Australia is 72 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 52 and mostly cloudy with a beach advisory, meaning look out for the sneaker waves. And New York is 60 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Associated Press staff bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. The British government insisted yesterday, Sunday, it has robust cybersecurity for government officials after a newspaper reported that former Prime Minister Liz Truss's phone was hacked while she was UK Foreign Minister. The Mail, yesterday, Sunday, said that the hack was discovered when Truss was running to become Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister in the summer. It said the security breach, which was kept secret by then Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the head of the civil service. The newspaper, citing unnamed sources, said Russian spies were suspected of the hack. It said hackers gained access to sensitive information, including discussions about the Ukraine war with foreign officials, as well as private conversations between Truss and a political ally, former Treasury Chief Kwasi Kwarteng. The UK government spokesperson declined to comment on security arrangements, but said it had robust systems in place to protect against cyber threats, including regular security briefings for ministers. Opposition parties demanded an independent investigation into the hack and into the leak of the information to the newspaper. Labour Party Law and Order spokesperson Yvette Cooper said the story raises issues about cybersecurity. It's why cybersecurity has to be taken so seriously by everyone across government. The role of hostile state, she said, but also the allegations about whether a cabinet minister has been using a personal phone for serious government business and serious questions about why this information or this story has been leaked or briefed right now.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Even more Associated Press staff brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. A venomous 7-foot king cobra that escaped from its home in a Swedish zoo has returned back home by itself, bringing a happy ending to over a week-long disappearance saga. Houdini, as we named him, has crawled back into his terrarium. CEO Jonas Wallström of the Skansen Aquarium told the Swedish public broadcaster SVT on Sunday yesterday. The deadly snake, whose official name is Servas, which is Sir Hiss, escaped on the 22nd of October via a light fixture in the ceiling of its glass enclosure at the aquarium, part of the zoo at the Skansen Open Air Museum and Park on Stockholm's Djurgården Island. As a result of an intensive search with X-ray machines, Houdini was located earlier this week in a confined space near the terrarium in the insulation between walls. Holes were drilled into the walls where the snake was hiding, but the cobra disappeared from the view of the X-ray cameras yesterday. It turned out the snake had given up its freedom ride and crawled back to its terrarium. It was too stressful for Houdini with all the holes in the walls, so he wanted to go home again, Wallström told SVT. The park said the snake would not have survived the cold climate if it had gotten out of the building. Indeed. That's a happy ending for everybody concerned, and that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.